This is my third video in a series of looking at the what I call the perfect shuffle or a riffle sequence using Wolfram-Cloud or Mathematica. So here are references to the previous two videos. Here's the sequence in the OEIS, the Online Encyclopedia of Integer Sequences. And one way, at least one of the ways to produce this is through shuffling or riffling. So you take a deck of cards, you take an array, a list, it's in some of even length, and you break it up into two. You sort of take the first n. If it's 2n, you take the first n and the second n, and then you take the first item from pile one, and then the first item from pile two, and then the second item from pile one, and the second item from pile two, and you interleave them in this way or riffle them. And uh, then that is a single shuffle or riffle. And then you ask the question for that size deck, array, list. Um, how long does it take to like recover the original order? Okay. And in the first video, I attacked it sort of directly and actually made the list and did the shuffling, did the riffling. And Mathematica, I did not use the method riffle in Mathematica, but it does support such a method. And then I decided to just follow uh, my cards, my values were just the integers, and so I decided. And the first one and the last one don't don't budge, don't move. The first one always has the first position. The last one always has the last position. So I followed the first one that moves. I followed the two around until it got back in its same position, and that used a lot less memory, and so it was easier to sort of generate the results. And so I can sort of easily, just with what Wolfram-Cloud provides for free, go up to at least 2,000 or more. And sort of here they are. Okay, and then I plotted them, and you can see that they fall on these lines. And I played some down here with these very lowest ones, um, and saw some patterns within this. Um, and now I am looking. So this line has a slope of 2, and then this other sort of next prominent line has a slope of 1. And then right now what I'm looking at is these points in between. There was one, since I made it, there's sort of one line in here that's somewhat prominent, that has a slope of 4/3. So I pulled those out so you could see them sort of lining up nicely. And so I used the select, all those points I called results. Again, there are like 2,000 of them, but I'm selecting from results. The ones sent have a slope of 4/3. So it's 4/3. This sort of pound sign, square bracket 1 is like the X. So I have all these, I'll call them tuples, and they're X, Y. So I'm going to refer to this as the X and that as the Y. So I am in this one, in this sort of no man's land in here. I am pulling out the ones that have a slope of 4/3. So this is X. I'm adding 1 to the X and subtracting 2. And that was the sort of equation of a line of, and then it pulled out these values. So these are the XY pairs. And then when one of the successes I had down with the low ones was looking at at the numbers, the x's. So it's easy to sort of come up with if you focus on a line, it's easy to figure out its slope and intercept. Um, and then and you can grab the values and prove the harder problem is to figure out the x's, the pattern in the x's so the relationship between the x and the y for these lines is easy because it's just a line. And you can sort of see them lining up, so you know it exists. So you grab a few points, fit it, grab the slope and the intercept, and see if you get a bunch of values, and you do. But the harder thing is to figure out the relationship among the x's that put it on this line. And I had success with these lower ones in the second video I made by looking at the x's in binary. And so what I'm going to explore here is sort of other bases. So I grabbed these, I call them the sub-uppers. So this line up here I call the uppers, and then I had this in between line, and there are other straight points that I'm going to try to deal with, but I had so I picked out this one prominent line in this no man's land. I mean, nothing's very prominent in there, but I pulled out the one of the more prominent things with this one with a slope of 4/3 and pulled out the values using select. And then I looped over select and I put the x's in this time in base 3. And then I saw that the x's were in base 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, etc. So a clear pattern arising. And I already know that. So if I have a pattern among the x's, and then I already know the relationship between x and y. So I say, like, I have this pattern or sub pattern down. I know the x's that lead to it, and I know the relationship of the y's to those x's. Okay. Then I grabbed what I called the tweens. So there was that 4/3 line that I just sort of figured out the pattern for. And then there was this slope 2 pattern. There's multiply by 2. There's my slope 2, which was my upper. So I called the 4/3 the sub-uppers and this the upper. So between there were still some even rarer sort of showing up things between the upper bound and this 4/3 sub-upper. And I just sort of said select from the results, and I wanted it to be the y to be greater than the 4/3 line and less than the upper bound. There were a lot of points on the upper bound. I didn't want all those. And it pulled out these. And then I started looking at these in various bases. So I ran this particular line a number of times, switching the base, sort of, what if it's 5? What if it's 7? What if it's and looking for patterns. And I also put down, so I'm putting down the base to look for patterns in the base, because that's where I keep finding. So that's I put it in different bases. I put down the X, I put down the Y, and then this is more or less a slope. I added a little bit to the Y, I add a little bit to the X, but basically this is a slope, and I made it numerical. And again, I'm looking for patterns and account for those lines. And so that's why I wanted the slope. Now the slope's not going to be exact, but I'm looking, it gives me an idea of like what to gather together, that they might be if this quasi slope ends up to be close, then maybe those lines belong together. And of course, when I pulled out these numbers, just me being weird, it sort of was a little bit of a thrill to see, 13 and 666 in the list. Nothing significant about that, just amused me. Okay. So now I'm looking in this tween area, more than the fourth, less than the two, more than the four thirds. And I'm looking for patterns, and I found some. Okay. So I found a pattern in uh, base 5, and that accounted for, of those things above, the 13, the 63, and the 313. And that uh, pattern was in base 5. These numbers were 23223 2223, and it gave y's of 20, 100, and 500. And so the relationship among the x's and y's was, there was an 8/5 slope minus, and then the intercept was minus 4/5. So 8/5 and 4/5, and the pattern showed up in base 5. So we're coming to see like a pattern of patterns. So we had this pattern up here in base 3, where it was 1 2 1 1 2 1 1 1 2. Now we see a pattern in down here in 5s, where it was 2 3 2 2 3 2 2 2 3. And then I sort of, sometimes these patterns get to be sort of higher than I have values for it. I just sort of say to be checked. But this one, the next number was only base 5, so I could, the next one was, that I didn't have in my original list, was 1563, and it sort of fit my pattern. It fell on that line. So I think I have pattern B, a line in this sort of no man's land with slope of 8/5. I have a relationship between the x's, this sort of pattern in base 5, and a known sort of simple equation. Then I, poking around, found something in base 11. These were the ones with a slope, when, as I say, I captured the slope here. And these were the ones with a slope of the order of like 1.8. And this was 61 and 666. And they had a pattern in base 11 of 5 6 5 5 6. And here were the y's. That doesn't look quite right. What was 666? What was the y? That seems to be too low. 666, where are you? 666. 1210. What did I put down here? One, two, one. Oh, yes, I missed the 0. Okay, and that had a slope of 20 elevenths, and then the x-intercept was 10 elevenths. Okay, so in base 5, I saw a pattern, and it was then 8/5 and 4/5. In base 11, I found a pattern, and it had 20 and 10. Sort of like, this is, here's my base, and this is one less than it, and then this was double it. And the next one would be, the next one to look for would be an x of 7321, which would fit my pattern of 5 6 5 5 6 5 5 5 6 in base 11. Okay, so these numbers are fairly spread out, but I believe that pattern is right, especially when these equation numbers come out to be sort of so clean. It gives me confidence that this is right. Then I sort of gathered, next I gathered the ones with a slope of around 1.84, and played with base 13, and the 85 and had a in base 13 was 6-7. And then that seemed to be another pattern here that the and it was here the pattern was ones and then two, 1-1-1-2, 1-1-1-1-2. Here in this pattern with the in base 5 it was 2-3-2-2-3, and in base 11 it was 5-6-5-5-6. So here in base 13 it was 6-7 6-6-7. So they sort of start to see a pattern among the patterns, and you sort of get good at making a guess. So this I only had two numbers to base my guess on, but in base 13, 85 is 6-7. In base 13, 1099 is 6-6-7. And that equation came up to be 24/13 was the slope minus 12/13. So the intercept was half of the slope. The slope was a nice rational and sort of fit my pattern, that the intercept was one less, so 10/11, 12/13. And then if I sort of figure out what's next in that base, well, I'd have to go up to like 14,281 to sort of test that pattern farther, but it seems to fit within the pattern of patterns. It's fitting. And then I said, okay, I had threes, I had fives, I had 11s and 13s. What happened to 7? And so then I said, well, the 7 seems to be missing, and it would be 3-4, 3-3-4, 3-3-3-4. So then I started sort of reverse engineering what were those. And they did indeed fit a pattern, but it was not a pattern in what I called the tween, had a slope more than 4/3. So I had slopes more than 1, more than 4/3 even, and less than 2. And this was indeed a pattern. The base 7 and the 3-4, 3-3-4, 3-3-4 formed a pattern and formed a line. But that slope was 6/7 rather than 12/7. So that that sort of there's something 7 was something of an exception within my pattern of patterns. And then I decided to look at 9. That was the others. It seemed to be odd numbers, but they were also primes. And so then I looked at this at 9, and there was indeed a pattern, but it was a pattern. It was just a sub pattern of the pattern already had 4-3. So it was just a part of my original part A pattern. So it was not a new pattern, just a sub pattern. All right, so just more patterns, more playing around with Wolfram-Cloud and seeing its power. All right, thanks for your attention.